here on Al Jazeera, bringing you some live pictures from inside Iran. We've been watching in the last 10 minutes or so Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, leading prayers in the funeral of General Soleimani. Of course, this is the second of 3 days of mourning when we've been seeing people all over the country as the general's body has moved around and allowed people to pay their respects. So again, these live pictures that we're seeing are prayers, and we've seen Soleimani's body move around the country. We know that eventually, later, of course, tomorrow, he will be interned in his hometown. But these are the pictures of the people of Iran coming out to pay their respects to a man who was divisive, of course, across the world, but in Iran itself, an incredibly meaningful person. We will bring you the pictures of Khamenei standing over the body and praying for this man who means so much to so many Iranians. We heard one lady earlier today talking very emotionally about how personally the people of Iran have taken this attack. And as you can see there literally is a sea of people in Iran's capital packing the streets. We're going to be able to talk to our correspondent, Dorsa Jabari, who's going to be able to give us some more context about just how important this moment is for a country that is fully in mourning. Dorsa, I don't know if you are with me yet. She's going to be up with us in a second. But as I say, later we're going to see him being taken to his home city, where, of course, the streets are expected to be again filled with people. Interestingly, the talk is still very much, the tone rather, is one of revenge. We've heard from the daughter of Commander Soleimani, and she said that she still wants to see the government take forceful action, and that is still very much the feeling across the streets of Iran. Let's bring you some pictures now. We've seen very many officials meeting with General Soleimani's family. This is the pictures that we have from slightly earlier today of his daughter. And she said that, quoting here, "Crazy Trump should not think her father's death means everything is over." And that feeling of anger and shock is still percolating across the entire country. Our correspondents have been out and about in the streets talking to people, and the feeling really still is, I think, one of shock, even 2 or 3 days later. And she is talking to the nation, I think, in reflecting this feeling that something has to be done in response. Of course, there are complex diplomatic pictures going on in the back end, talking to lots of diplomats globally from around the world, trying to get a handle on what is a global crisis. We heard from Mousavi, the Iranian foreign minister, yesterday, who spoke about many countries making approaches to Iran, trying to figure out how to get a handle on this enormous crisis, potentially regionally in the Middle East, but also globally. And of course, in the US, we're hearing comment very much along partisan lines about what the American public and potentially politicians should be doing to reach out and talk to Iran. But of course, the political tone may be one of diplomacy and rhetoric, but on the streets of Tehran, these pictures that we're seeing right now, it's very much a feeling of, I think, acute sadness. Well, 3 days of mourning have been declared, of course, from Soleimani, and his remains will be interned in his hometown on Tuesday. We have just seen in these past few minutes Supreme Leader Khamenei and President Hassan Rouhani, and the Speaker also of the Parliament, Larijani, praying over Soleimani's body. And we've seen a number of politicians and prominent figures coming out onto the streets and mingling with the public. Again, the feeling very much being one of expecting some sort of political, perhaps even military response, although we don't know exactly what that will look like. For some of our viewers watching around the world, I know that our correspondents have been trying to give a flavour of just why this man has inspired such a following. And of course, he is a major part, or was a major part, of Iran's national security architecture. So, of course, when he was killed in a targeted killing, that has made people feel shocked, vulnerable, and incredibly upset. And of course, they've come out onto the streets to show that. As you can see, that sea of people moving down the street there in Tehran. The other interesting thing is just how much these targeted killings have brought the Iranian public together. It wasn't that long ago that we saw protests on the streets of Iran, but now there is this feeling of, I think, national solidarity. Let's just have a listen in and soak up some of the atmosphere. Dorsa Jabari joins me now live from Tehran. So, Dorsa, some incredibly poignant moments. I'm just watching the live pictures here of a kind of solemn sea of people. And of course, we've seen those very personal, I can only imagine, prayers happening this morning in Tehran.
Yes, certainly. There is scenes that nobody really expected to see in the capital this morning. Millions have come out to show their respect and say goodbye to Qasem Soleimani, a man they say is the father of Iran, one of the founding fathers, really. We just saw the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, perform the prayer service over his coffin. He was standing, next to him was the President Hassan Rouhani, as well as the Speaker of Parliament, Ali Larijani, as well as the head of the Revolutionary Guards, Brigadier General Salami. On his left, we saw the head of the country's judiciary, Ebrahim Raisi, a very important figure in the Islamic Republic. And next to him was as well the new head of the Quds Force, Ismail Qaani, who was appointed to replace the late General Qasem Soleimani on Friday. The scenes that we saw was a very, very emotional Supreme Leader, something we don't see very often, as well as a very emotional head of the country's judiciary, Ebrahim Raisi. There was very, very intense emotions on display by the highest ranking officials in the Islamic Republic alongside the Supreme Leader, where the ceremony was taking place at Tehran University just a short while ago.
And Dorsa, I think it's extremely interesting to see, as you see, this outpouring of emotion across Iran. I remember you saying yesterday that so many people had in fact turned out, that actually General Soleimani's body was delayed in several places. How do we explain to our viewers around the world why the processions of mourning that we are seeing are so intense and at that level of a state funeral?
Well, I think it's because the name Qasem Soleimani was synonymous with the Islamic Republic for decades, really. He was one of the people who fought for the revolution, the Islamic Revolution of 1979, alongside the likes of the now Supreme Leader and President Hassan Rouhani. So these men have known each other for over 4 decades. And also his service during the Iran-Iraq War between 1980 and 1988. There's stories and tales, if you will, of his heroism on the battlefields. There's a very famous story about him in battle when he was shot in the abdomen when he was fighting in the south of Iran against Saddam Hussein and his forces. And he was taken to the hospital where he was operated on. And as soon as the operation was over, he demanded to be released, and he walked out of the hospital and back onto the battlefield. So it's these kinds of stories. And then in recent years, his work in Syria and Iraq, and the videos that we've seen come out from the battlefields, the way he deals with soldiers there. There is this sense of heroism that's been built around this figure. Also because he was a very quiet and private person. He didn't give a lot of interviews. He didn't like a lot of fanfare. Even his funeral, his burial place to be tomorrow on Tuesday in his hometown of Kerman, according to his own wishes, is to be in a very, very simple plaque at a cemetery alongside other martyrs, as he's requested to be buried, without any fanfare square or large monuments on his grave. It's these kinds of stories and his personality that really elevated him to the status that he is now. And also, the main point is the way he was killed. The issue is he was assassinated by one of the longest and most hostile forces for Iranians, that is the American government, carried out this assassination against Soleimani. So the Iranians are very, very angry at the way he was killed. I think they feel that this is a very, very unjust act that was carried out. We're already hearing stories of his death being compared to that of various imams in Shia religion, how they were unjustly killed. This is a very important point for the ideology of Shia Muslims, especially Iranians. And I think his death is a perfect example of that sentiment that Shias carry with them of being victims and being victimized. I think this is the extreme example of that very ideology.
And Dorsa, yesterday we saw the Iranian foreign minister start to give us some idea of what a political response might look like. And of course, we've heard from members of the Iranian public today, still extremely raw and emotional, with very strong thoughts about what the government should do next.
Certainly, and also interesting to point out that the late General Soleimani's daughter also spoke briefly at the funeral service this morning. She was also very emotional. She read a very lengthy poem about her father and his work and his commitment to the Islamic Revolution. And she's been very vocal about the fact that she wants revenge for her father's death, and so do millions of Iranians at this point. They want some kind of a response from their government. They want some kind of action. We've heard from very high-ranking officials, including the defense minister and senior advisors to the supreme leader, who have all said that there will be a just response. There will be an his death will be avenged, rather. We are expecting some kind of retaliation, but the president has said that it may not happen today or tomorrow, but in the days and weeks and months to come. It is very, very likely that Iran will have a very strong reaction. There was emergency meetings held since Friday between various different military apparatuses about what to do next. And it is a very, very critical time. There's been a plethora of diplomatic activity around Iran and various officials here. We saw the Qatari foreign minister who came to Tehran on Saturday. So there's been a number of contacts made to the foreign minister, Javad Zarif, as well, from a number of European countries who are very concerned, and rightfully so. There is a lot of anger, and the Iranian public is demanding their government do something in response. But I think the initial shock and anger is going to wear off soon, and I think there will be some serious thought given as to where this will leave Iran and its relationship with the diplomatic community, because this event has certainly changed the course of Iranian history, and also many analysts here believe the course of the history in the Middle East.
And Dorsa, we have seen, and I think it's no exaggeration to say that it's been really a sea of mourners, hasn't it, over yesterday and of course today. What are we going to see through the rest of today and into tomorrow when his body heads to be interned in his hometown?
We're expecting once the mourners today in the capital have had a chance to pay their respects, the body will make its way to the holy city of Qom, which is just outside of Tehran. There, the people there will be also able to pay their respects. Then from Qom, his body will be flown out to Kerman in central Iran. That is Qasem Soleimani's hometown. And the burial will take place on Tuesday. We're expecting that to be an extraordinary event as well, because the hometown of Qasem Soleimani is where he's, of course, most popular. And we can already see from the scenes that we've seen over the past 24 hours, he's been extremely popular all over the country. People have come out everywhere you go. I was in Mashhad yesterday, and the number of people that came out was just astonishing. And also, people's sentiments there, I think, is a indication of what we can expect, really, of the scenes that we're going to see in his hometown in Kerman on Tuesday.
And Dorsa, when these targeted killings happened, I remember having a conversation about whether this event would be an opportunity for Iranians to come together, to unify. And is that the feeling that you get?
Absolutely. Prior to this, there was a lot of divisions. There was protests even. If you recall, in November, the president increased fuel prices, and it had a very, very severe reaction from the population. There was divisions. There was dozens, hundreds killed as a result of those protests that were suppressed very quickly by various apparatuses in the country. I think this has actually turned everything around inside the country. Where there were divisions, there is no longer. Where there was disputes, there is no longer, at least for the time being. I think this has really been a turning point in the country's history, where people that, even if they don't like the government or they have issues with the system itself, they don't really see that as enough of a factor to divide them when it comes to Qasem Soleimani. He was a very, very unifying figure in Iran. There are posters of him now across every street corner. It's a public holiday today for people to pay their respects to him in the capital. There's been an airport named after him in the southern city of Ahvaz. There is a street named after him now in Tehran. So this figure will forever go down in the history books of this country as one of the most important and influential figures. Many people not only saw him as a general, but as a figure who united the country. And that's because people say that he was a very just man. He was a very pious and religious man, and a very, very strategic military commander as well. So all this has kind of put together a figure that really brings the country together, and his death will certainly do that as well.
It's interesting, Dorsa, isn't it, for our viewers around the world, that we've got this kind of competing narratives in the US, depending on which news channel you're watching. Soleimani was very much looked at as being a kind of invisible Iranian henchman, if you like, and the bogeyman, as I saw him being described on one channel. And yet what we see are so many people across Iran, and there was one lady who very much struck me this morning who came out and said, you know, we valued this man more sometimes than members of our own family. And it's very interesting to see these competing narratives run alongside each other.
Certainly, you know, the figure that people have in their mind in the West of Qasem Soleimani is this shadowy, lurky figure of a commander who comes and goes very secretly from the countries such as Syria and Iraq and Lebanon. But in Iran, it's a very different narrative here, obviously. It's one of a man who was tasked by the supreme leader to be really in charge of the country's security. He was the head of the Quds force. He was appointed to that position in the early 1990s, and the Quds force is notoriously secretive and operates very much quietly. Their assignments are never public, their missions are never known, but Iranians are aware that they do very difficult work and they are in charge of the country's security. Many people here believe the reason that ISIL or other terrorist organizations haven't been able to set foot inside Iran is because of forces such as the Quds force and the likes of General Qasem Soleimani. So there is a very different narrative of what this man was like, but really it was one of his main goals in life, and we've heard this from his family members, was to die in such a way, to be killed and assassinated. So he is, in a way, really the whole purpose of his life was to end this way, his family has said, especially his daughter, is that this was the ultimate sacrifice for him. But the idea that he was a terrorist, he was designated as a terrorist by the United Nations and the US government many, many years ago, really added to his status. It elevated him by bringing him to the forefront of what he's actually achieving in his life.
Dorsa Jabbar there joining me live, giving us some context for these pictures that we're seeing from Iran. Dorsa, as always, Thank you. If you've been listening to Dorsa and to us here on Al Jazeera over the past 10 minutes or so, you will have been seeing these pictures, these incredible pictures from all across Iran yesterday and today. This is the second of 3 days of mourning. We're seeing a complete outpouring of grief. And very interestingly, Dorsa was just telling us that so many prominent officials have been showing a very emotional side, which will give you some idea of just how much General Soleimani meant as part of Iranian civil society, as part of culture, as part of the security architecture. These incredible pictures from Iran with the level of a state funeral, where we've seen the supreme leader praying over his body.